Remainder of our program, we're going to offer a challenge to those people, the corporate Democrats and the corporate Republicans, who believe, along with the editors and most of the writers of The Nation magazine, that we need a politic of divisiveness and we need to be ideologically aligned with this president. For those of us who are independent thinking and wonder why wouldn't the people at The Nation magazine have presented the views of Gary Johnson or Rocky Anderson or Jill Stein of the Green Party as legitimate challenges, it just continues ideology as ever. Gerald Celente is not an ideologist. He is a very independent thinker. He is in Rhinebeck, New York. He is the director and founder of the TrendsResearchInstitute and its TrendsJournal. He's on the phone with us now. Nice to have you with us today, Gerald.
Oh, it was great being on with you, Gary.
Gerald, what I'm going to do, we're going to do a little differently this time. I'm going to hit a lot of issues with some statements of people who are concerned about what's going on, and then I'd like for you to give us your response to what they're saying. And I've selected issues that are not touched at all in the presidential debates or by the pundits for both sides. Okay?
All right.
Here are the things that concern me in a major way. I'll start with environmental issues that were not touched upon at all. This is the latest as of today. Earthquake-causing hydrofracking is now to be allowed within 500 feet of nuclear plants, in spite of the fact that the federal government has officially stated that fracking can cause earthquakes, and even some fracking companies now admit this fact, and the majority of the scientific community agrees. Now, we know, for example, that earthquakes can damage nuclear power plants. Look at Fukushima as the example. Even the Japanese government now admits this. And yet we are going to allow, as of now, these hydrofracking companies to frack within 500 feet of our nuclear power plants. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, the fracking issue, on the fracking issue, France, of course, has banned fracking for that very reason. And we had an earthquake. I'm actually in Kingston, New York. We used to be in Rhinebeck, and there was an earthquake that happened in Virginia. That was very suspicious as well. It went all the way up to Canada. And our building shook here in Kingston. And one of the first things I asked was, do we have earthquake insurance because of all this fracking that's going on? And we didn't. And I got it, and it wasn't that expensive. So when you look at the presidential debate, or I should say the presidential reality show, they each try to outdo each other with fracking. Obama, of course, doesn't call it fracking. He calls it exploration for natural gas, and as though it's going to waft up through our feet, just from the earth, and without doing anything, without pumping millions of gallons of chemically treated water into the earth. They try to outdo each other. Romney criticized Obama for not opening up more public land to fracking. What the liberal Obama apologists fail to admit is that Obama has opened up over 700 million, that's right, 700 million acres of public land to hydrofrackers. So they're trying to outdo each other. So that's where it's going. What we have, the reason why there's been no intelligent discussion on this between either Obama or Romney, the reason is because it's a debate between an empty suit and a stuffed shirt, a vulture capitalist craving for power, and an emperor with no clothes that just does the bidding of those who have him in power. So don't expect anything intelligent to come out of the issue.
All right. I will do an add-on to that. This is just in. The sun was giving off some X generation in magnitude solar storms yesterday, 4 of them in the last 3 days. These were equal to the size of the Carrington effect in 1859 or 1921 one, and had these hit the Earth, it would be lights out forever. But they didn't. But this is just the beginning of this really bad cycle. This is just this morning, an hour ago, from Countercurrents, from Dr. Ramesh and also Dr. Pagazandi and Dr. Padmanabhan. And here's what it says. Severe space weather that involves transfer of massive amounts of energy and matter from the sun to the Earth is in a 100-year event that can cause collapse of power grid on a global scale. Recovery may take months and years. As the last event happened in 1921, there is high probability of a recurrence, and prolonged non-availability of electricity will cause meltdowns and explosions in nuclear reactors and spent fuel rods. Regulators in the U.S. are considering to harden their nuclear assets against this. India and other nuclear nations have yet to spell out their action plan to prevent a radiological catastrophe. The largest power outage in history happened in India on the 30th and 31st of this year in July, affecting 320 million people. An estimated 32,000 megawatts was taken offline, and the restoration was rather quick. There are hundreds of reasons for the grids to fail and 100+1 reasons to celebrate it. However, the prolonged outage is a serious affair with catastrophic consequences like meltdown and explosions of nuclear reactors. The possibility of a global-scale grid failure lasting months or years due to space weather events has been under scrutiny by scientists and governments for over a decade. Then it goes into talk about the sun's role as the donor of abundant energy in the form of visual light and ultraviolet radiation, as well as we all know. But also the sun, unlike what most people understand, is bombarding continuously the Earth with other forms of energy and matter, most of which are blocked or deflected by the Earth's magnetosphere. And still, in spite of that, 1 million tons of particles arrive every year inside our atmosphere. This is known as cosmic radiation, and this particle shower causes cloud formation and also generates geomagnetically induced current of about 1 ampere on the Earth's surface. Now, they're concerned about solar flares, which are magnetically driven explosions on the surface of the sun, and these are powerful bursts of electromagnetic radiation in the form of X-ray, extreme ultraviolet rays, and gamma rays, and radio bursts that travel at a speed of light, and these heat up the upper atmosphere and strip electrons of the atoms in the ionosphere. And then you have the solar proton events, and you have the coronal mass ejections, and all of this means that if we get hit with one of these, and if it's an X factor, which are the most serious, we're out of luck. Here's what they predict, quote, and I'll go through just the title, not the substance of it. Grid failure due to geomagnetically induced electricity, damage to satellites, damage to electronics, radio frequency anomalies, and the effect of global positioning systems, the GPSs. And then he gives the scientific validation for this, including NASA yesterday releasing photographs of one of these mass ejections. He uses the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, NASA, the European Space Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, all predicting this and tracking this. In fact, we have 24 satellites for over 20 years up there. The one furthest in space is called the ACE satellite. It's located 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, and it's the one that is closest to the sun. And you have these reports that no one seems to ever read, that no one seems to be aware of, about solar eruptions occurring more frequently, and most of them may not be Earth-directed, but nonetheless, these are really bad, and if they ever come to Earth, it's lights out. Then it goes into our nuclear risk, and there it really gets detailed. All of this information is included in our updated article on how to survive a solar storm, which is up on our website. But wouldn't you think that something that could be an earth changer for everyone on this planet wasn't even discussed at all? And the complications of our grid collapsing, our nuclear facilities exploding, not a mention of this. Your thoughts?
Well, why wasn't there a mention of it? Look who's up there. These are two little boys. Let's talk about contraception. And why don't we talk more about contraception? Then we could talk about gun control. I mean, they avoid every major issue. Our thoughts, Gary, from one of our top trends for 2011, and going into the future. This is what we wrote. The enormous magnetic storm, we're talking about the Carrington effect, that blew out and fried the primitive telegraph system of the day. That was back in the 1800s, 1859. In today's electronically wired, satellite-dependent world, such an intense storm could cause an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, that would fry all communications and electricity around the world. An electronic meltdown of that magnitude would be so catastrophic that, by the time it could be repaired, the very system that depends upon it would cease to function. With virtually every aspect of life affected, banking, business, military, government, food supplies, transportation, financial sector, telecommunications, etc., the developed world would come to a standstill. And we wrote this because, for example, solar flares are being predicted for around 2012. Not just the usual flares on their 11-year cycle. These will be massive civilization-wrecking flares along the lines of the well-documented 1859 Carrington event. So what you're saying and what's happening, it's all coming to pass. Again, look at the people in charge. These are boys. The Republicans and Democrats are boys and girls. These are not sound-thinking adults. You have Mittens Romney, who was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple, and you have Obama, who's never worked a day in his life. Excuse me. He was a social worker in Chicago. An organizer, not even a worker, a social organizer who organized nothing, didn't improve one street, let alone a neighborhood. So what do you expect? What do people expect from these losers? Where do you have to keep going?
Okay,
how about the wars?
Gerald,
they started that beauty in Libya.
Gerald, I'm not finished yet.
Okay, go on.
Did you have your fiber today, Gerald? Good. I don't think you did. You probably had a little bit too much excitement last night, Gerald.
I'm watching this stuff,
Gerald,
Gary.
have less rough sex before you come on the show. So, all right. So let's continue on because I have a lot of stuff to get to you. All right. So just give us your short answer on these. They were both praising their positioning of Israel. And we would back Israel. We would have their backs, which means, in my view, that the Likud, headed by Netanyahu, that controls the Knesset by a small margin, has been given a green light to go ahead and attack Iran when they want to. Here's the other side of that. This is the latest on Iran and why I believe that we should pay some attention. This is from Jim Loeb from lowblog.com. Quote, oil geopolitical experts say attacking Iran poses huge risks. I'll quote this. As a bastion of foreign policy realism, the Center for National Interest, formerly the Nixon Center, is known around Washington for hosting very lively discussions among experts. And Friday's session entitled War with Iran, Economic and Military Considerations, but particularly engaging and virtually unanimous and almost unanimously scary in its conclusions. Iranian Navy fires a Mirab missile during the Navy war games in the Straits of Hormuz in southern Iran. And then they go through all the different outcomes that these people, mind you, who are these people who are there? Well, three presenters, Admiral Mark Fitzgerald, who served as Deputy Commander of U.S. Naval Forces, Central Command, and Commander of U.S. Navy European Forces among those. Jeffrey Kemp, a CNI Fellow who served as a Gulf expert on Reagan's National Security Council. And J. Robinson West, Chairman and founder of an energy cartel, talks about the energy outcome. And they all say the same thing. We would not be able to defeat Iran. This is not a small country. This is one of the largest countries in the Middle East. And they're talking about and this is something I predicted. They're saying that they're going to go after Saudi Arabia, and they're going to end up, quote, specifically, that they're going to destroy up to 8 million barrels a day from getting out to the market, specifically 5 million barrels from Saudi's Aramco's facility and the pipeline that runs to the Ras Tamara terminal in the Gulf just across Iran. And they told them how they could do it. 2.5 million barrels that run through southern Iraq, where, quote, the Iranians have a lot of agents and who could presumably wreak havoc on the pipeline, and as much as another million more barrels that are pumped from the Caspian Sea to Turkey on the Mediterranean. And you could lose 8 million barrels a day of production, and it would not come back quickly. According to Mr. West, we believe the price of oil would go above $200 a barrel, and moreover, the conclusion does not take account of any Iranian effort to block the Straits of Hormuz, which they believe the Navy could eventually clean up rather quickly, or possibly the Trem may use its missiles to strike the huge LNG facility in Qatar. They said, quote, the lights go out in South Korea and Japan if that happens. From our standpoint, the cost would be just enormous. For them to tie up the oil business wouldn't be that difficult. And that's what they went on to say in detail. And yet, we are led to believe by the Bill O'Reillys, the Sean Hannitys, and Michael Savage, all these, Mark Levin, that go in there and take these guys out. This is the same kind of irresponsible neo-war hawking that we heard in the beat the drums up to the 2003, and we're saying we've got your back. Anything you do, we're supportive of you. So that's part one of the question. Part two, shorter. U.S. bombing of Iraq. The toxic legacy continues. New study links heavy bombing of Fallujah and al-Basra to staggering rises in birth defect and miscarriages. A new study shows that we are leaving a toxic legacy to the two largest cities in two of the larger cities in the country. The study, published in the Bulletin of Environmental Contamination Toxicology, a peer-reviewed journal, looked at the southern cities Basra and the central city of Fallujah and found a staggering rise in miscarriages and birth defects, including a spina bifida. And they went on and to talk about what this means. Now, nowhere do you hear about how many babies are dying of miscarriages, how many are born with birth defects, so many that parents are afraid to have children, and yet we take no responsibility for the consequences of depleted uranium, and also we take no consequences for the human nonsense. For example, this is from Global Research, Crimes Against Humanity, Iraq's Mass Graves. And what has happened is they found mass graves where one official group, the Iraqi National Police Commandos that the United States trained and were responsible for, went in and took a whole large group of people out of another Iraqi agency and the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research and killed them and put them into a mass grave. Not once has our government or State Department or NATO or anyone else taken responsibility for bringing those who committed this crime to justice. So it seems though any form of crime against humanity committed by our allies in Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, or any place else, or Saudi Arabia, that's fine. And so we live by this concept of rule of law, but we're more interested in ruling and not paying attention to the law. Would you address these, please?
On Israel, during the debate, Israel was mentioned 34 times. And as you point out, both candidates said an attack on Israel would be an attack on the United States. I'm fed up with this. I mean, you ask me why I'm like I am. I've been writing about this, Gary, for months. Pick up the Summer Trends Journal, all about Israel and Iran. Pick up the Autumn Trends Journal, all about Israel and Iran. Here's one after another. Here, this is what we wrote. But while the politicians in Tel Aviv and D.C. were talking tough, Israeli military and intelligence officials were sounding an alarm. For example, former Mossad chief Meir Bagan feared that a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities would be ineffective and that an Iranian counterattack would have, quote, a devastating impact on Israel's daily life while igniting regional wars. And wars, you know, yeah. So one after another, we've been writing about this over and over and over. All of what you commented on about Iran and Israel, we've been writing about for months. So we know what's going to happen. if it happens, it will be the beginning of World War III. Do you know how they say the generals keep fighting the last war? That's what this one will be too. They'll be fighting the last war. This war will be fought with weapons of mass destruction. This war will be fought with suitcase-sized nukes. This war will be fought with biological warfare. This war will be hell on earth. There will be no getting away from it. And when you listen to the people, you mentioned not having taking responsibility. How come nobody's brought Bush or Blair or Cheney or Rumsfeld or Powell up for questioning for starting wars for fake reasons in Iraq? How come you've heard Obama bragging about how he took out Osama bin Laden and how he took out Gaddafi? And now the entire region is destabilized. There's a war in Mali. There's a war in Syria. All precipitated as a result of the destabilization of Libya. There's a war in Yemen, there's a war in Bahrain. The whole Middle East is up for grabs. And now they're talking about going after Iran. And just to make this clear, war has already been declared on Iran. It's called an economic war. Iran can't do business with anybody virtually in the world because of the sanctions put on against them by the United States and Israel. So this is just more of the same. It's just a different, the United States and NATO. And so what they're doing, Gary, is I've said this from the very beginning, when the financial panic began in 2008, we're seeing history repeat itself. It's the crash of 1929, Great Depression, currency wars, trade wars, World War II, the panic of '08, the Great Depression. It's a depression going on. A depression in Greece, a depression in Spain, a depression in Ireland, a depression in Portugal, a depression in Bulgaria, a depression in Romania, a depression in Hungary. There's depressions going on around the world. And the official unemployment rate in the United States, according to John Williams' shadow stats, is between 16 to 22%. Then you have currency wars. You're seeing the currency wars heat up. Don't listen to me. Listen to Guido Mantega, the finance minister from Brazil. All of this lowering of interest rates and dumping money into the system nonstop is devaluating the currencies, causing a currency war. You even heard Obama brag about it during the last debate, how policy has now allowed American companies to export more. Yeah, because they're devaluing the dollar. So now you have currency wars, and now listen to the trade wars heating up. You don't have to only listen to Obama and Romney bashing China. All you have to do is look what's going on now between China and Japan with the disputes going on about the islands, these places in the South China and other areas.
Gerald, let me interject something. Just an hour ago, it was announced that 7 of 10 Asian countries have now pegged their currencies to the Chinese yuan instead of the U.S. dollar. Those countries are Hong Kong, those countries exclude Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Mongolia. But these are major countries, and including what we thought were some of the former allies, and they're not going to look at the dollar anymore. They're going to look at the Chinese currency, and that, I believe, is going to have a destabilizing effect, and I don't believe most people are even aware of this. So when you look at South Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, you're looking at some of the strongest economies in that part of the world, and they're now siding with China. So I had predicted this many times. In fact, you and I had predicted this together, that it's only a matter of time before the dollar loses this position of reserve currency, and then watch the dollar drop. And I believe that that's going to happen. I'm going to take you to a different level now. As you know, Fukushima was worse than Chernobyl. And I just did a major special on it on a Progressive Commentary Hour, which is now on our archives for people to listen to, with all these people giving insights about this. But here's what Greenpeace says about Fukushima. They say that they just got back yesterday from monitoring radiation near the disabled Fukushima plant, and they say that there are 285,000 Japanese living near Fukushima in the area, and they're being lied to about the amount of radiation that they're actually coming into contact with. They say that the people are getting, at 40 monitoring posts they looked at, they're getting much higher radiation than what the government's telling them. And the government then did something. They cleared out a small area. Then they put a monitor there. Then they read the monitor and says, see, this monitor doesn't, we don't have a lot. But if you step just 10 feet outside of that cleaned up area, you went up to the high ratings. So we're not even being honest about how bad this Fukushima could be there. Now, separately, we mentioned when Obama was bragging about the sanctions are working, I don't believe people understand what he was saying. For example, the latest report shows that there are almost 6 million people in Iran suffering from illnesses that they can't get medicines to help them with their conditions because of the sanctions. And over 60,000 of them are acutely ill because of lack of proper medical care. So when you are saying that people can no longer get what they need for basic life support, I don't think we should be bragging about that. I think we should re-examine that. And that, unfortunately, he's following the Clinton doctrine. Do you remember when Bill Clinton and his Secretary of the State, Madeleine Albright, bragged that their sanctions were working, and Leslie Stahl in 60 Minutes says, but that's caused 500,000 deaths in children. Is that acceptable? And yeah, it's acceptable. Well, it's not your child that's dying because of the sanctions. And so I'm thinking, do they understand what it means to have these sanctions? Because the rulers, the mullahs, the ayatollahs, they're not going to suffer, but the people will. And then talk about people suffering, my final comment for you, Jennifer Lowenstein from Global Research, quote, starving people, targeting them with biological and chemical weapons. And it goes on to talk about how in Israel they are now targeting the people by giving them the minimum amount of calories necessary to sustain life, where they used to have at least 400 truckloads of essential supplies and food go into Gaza each day. Now it's down to 67 truckloads, but they intentionally doubled up on the truckloads of sugar, which is of worthless value, and precluded truckloads of fruits and vegetables and other foods that the people need. And as a result, there's been massive human suffering. And it was only through suing the government that they found were given the actual memorandum showing this was official policy, that they intended to starve the people into submission. And I'm thinking, you're supporting a country without any challenge or question that is willing to starve people into submission, and then you're supporting people that have the largest open air apartheid gulag in the world, and you're not allowing these people to have basic materials, including repair material for their power plants so they can have water and purification, and you're allowing people to end up with massive multiple diseases. This is not something that you should brag about unless you're absolutely certain the American public is too disinterested or too disconnected from other people suffering to care, because you've so demonized the Palestinian people as a whole by the irresponsible acts of the few. Your thoughts?
Well, on the Palestinian people as a whole, I mean, you didn't hear one mention of them, as Israel was mentioned 34 times during the debate. And then yesterday there was an article about Jimmy Carter saying how disgusted he was or disappointed he was with Netanyahu and Obama having done nothing to bring about any kind of a peace process. There's been nothing under the Obama administration. And then, of course, we heard from Mitt Romney saying that the Israelis were a superior culture than the Palestinians, and that's why they're more successful. I mean, that's how outrageous all of this is. And here's something that's very upsetting to me, and I don't like it. They're running ads in Florida. Florida's a huge swing state that Mittens has to win to get this to get the electoral vote. They're running ads continually with Netanyahu on there with his cartoon bomb at the UN during the line on that bomb, the red line, and saying how the tagline is how we have to stand by Israel unconditionally. I'm sick of hearing this. I'm not standing by anybody unconditionally. And if I was going to stand by anybody, it would be Italy, not Israel. So just take it easy over there. And they're getting us into war. Because this guy, again, I'm not saying this. You can listen to Carter saying it. You can listen to the people in Israel saying it, that how disgusted they are with Israel inflicting their pressure inside of the United States election. Here's a quote. Mr. Prime Minister, you want a crude, rude, unprecedented, reckless, and risky intervention in the U.S. elections. Who are you trying to replace? The administration in Washington or that in Tehran? That came from Shmuel Mofaz, the head of Israel's Kadima party. Now, going back to Fukushima, and going back, first of all, to how the people of the world are starving and nobody really cares. As I said, I didn't finish the last part of the parallel between 1929 and the Panic of '08. They're leading us to war. When all else fails, they lead us to war. There is a new order. It's the banking order, and it's out of order. They can't save it. The entire systems are collapsing around the world. Look what the stock market did yesterday. Look what the equity markets did around the world. Look at the numbers coming out of China. Look at them coming out of Vietnam. There are bank runs going on in Vietnam. The entire system is collapsing, and they're going to divert our attention by taking us to war. You mark my words. And if the people don't stand up, life is not going to be worth living. Because this war is going to be like no other war we saw.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that leads me into the next section on the economy, with an article from Nation of Change by Nomi Prinz before the election was over. Wall Street won, and also from Philip Pilkington from The Naked Capitalism: Why Free Markets Accommodate Speculation and Lead to Disequilibrium. But we're coming up to 1 minute left on all of our land-based terrestrial stations, and I want to thank you all on WPFW in Washington and WBAI in New York and KPFK and all the other stations around the United States who carry our 55-minute program. We will be continuing with Gerald Celente on the Internet, and you can listen over the telephone at 832-280-0066, 832-280-0066, where we will continue, because I have some important questions to ask him. I want to know where gold's going, silver's going, the currency's going, and where our society is going. So we thank you all for listening. I look forward to sharing more tomorrow. We will now continue with Gerald Celente over the Internet on Progressive Radio Network and over the telephone at 832-280-0066. Gerald, let me quote briefly from Nomi Prinz from Nation of Change. Quote, before the campaign, contributors lavish billions of dollars on their favorite candidate, and long after they toast their winner or drink to forget their loser, Wall Street has already primed itself to continue its reign over the economy. For after all the debates when it comes to banking, finance, and the ongoing subsidization of Wall Street, both presidential candidates and their parties' attitudes towards the banking sector are similar, meaning it must be preserved, as is, at all costs, rhetoric to the contrary aside. Obama has not brought sweeping reform that he promised upon the establishment banks, nor does Romney need to exude deregulatory babble, because nothing structurally substantive has been done to harness the biggest banks of the financial sector, enabled as they are by the entities, the SEC or the Fed or the Treasury Department or the White House. The most consistent political platform is still that big finance trumps Main Street economics, and the needs of the banking sector trump those of the population. We have a national policy condoning zero interest rate policy as somehow job creative, which it is not. Your thoughts?
I know the article well. Nomi Prinz writes for the TrendsJournal, and unfortunately this past TrendsJournal was so packed, it's 48 pages advertising free, that we couldn't put it in. And I asked Nomi if she could send it off to someone else. I apologize for us not being able to do it. So I know all about it, and she's right on target, as is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts and others. This is, as I said, there is a new world order. It's the banking order. We did an illustration on the Summit Trends Journal. We had Jesus Christ chasing out the money changers, and this time the money changers were Bank of America, Citigroup, Dexia, Royal Bank of Scotland, etc. I say that with all seriousness because this is a problem that has been plaguing humanity since the days of Christ. Think about it, Gary. The Prince of Peace becomes violent. You say, I'm excited? The Prince of Peace becomes violent. He picks up a whip to beat these people for what they are doing to society over 2,000 years ago. And now it's in front of our eyes, and no one wants to call it what it is. The money changers have taken over the world. They're money junkies. Just like a heroin addict, somebody whacked out on meth, somebody doing Oxycontin. They have no bounds, no boundaries, no loyalties. They'll kill their mother, and they'll kill us, and they are.
Okay. A couple more questions for you for today. This is called Why Free Markets Accommodate Speculation and Lead to Disequilibrium. And I'll just read one sentence here. It says, perhaps the most effective myth that mainstream economists have propagated over the course of the last century is the idea that the majority of prices in advanced capitalist economies are set up by the interaction of supply and demand in a market of scarce resources. Perhaps the second most effective myth they have spread is that this interaction tends towards equilibrium and stability. But both myths, being myths, are completely untrue. Now, my thought quickly, I believe that if we put a 5% tax on all, and I mean absolutely all, of the algorithm trades that are done, which are done about every few seconds, that would kill the high-frequency trading. I believe if we also were to put an end to speculation, you could not speculate, you could not manipulate, you could not control the price of commodities essential to life. They would be considered in common sovereign commodities. You couldn't commodify water, food, oil, gas, our currencies. That way, all these people who are making billions, hundreds of billions of dollars for their companies would not have the right to do that. Yet we don't have anyone in a position of power who has the strength of character to challenge these people. Your thoughts?
I think to some extent, that's very true about the commodities markets, and I know them quite well. I don't think it's the whole problem. I think it might solve some of the issue, but it's much bigger than that. When you just think of the wars that the United States has begun, would we be in Iraq if they weren't sitting upon the world's second largest oil supply? Would anybody care about Libya if they didn't have some of the most precious sweet crude oil and a lot of it? So it has other areas, and just to show you the level of corruption where that's only one element of what you're talking about. Remember that lovely LIBOR scandal? Oh, yes, the one where just a few banks rigged the interest rates. That's totally out of the news now. So the corruption's coming from many different directions and many levels. And to me, Gary, I'm in this business now 32 years, and I am totally convinced that nothing is going to change until the individual changes. Until enough people rise to higher levels and reaching them within themselves, that's the only way that the collective consciousness is going to change. Right now, people are still looking to leaders. They actually believe this stuff.
Okay, my final questions, and if you could give us short answers. What do you see happening in the next 2 years, 24 months, to our economy, to the price of gold and the price of silver and the value of the dollar?
Economy crashes, continues to go down. Devaluation of the dollar. The more the dollar gets debased, the higher gold prices go. I mentioned the rigging of the LIBOR. That's huge. They're rigging gold prices. They're rigging everything. You talked about high-frequency trading. The game is rigged.
Okay. Where do you think gold should be, and silver if it were not rigged?
Gold should definitely be around $2,500 an ounce, and silver no less than $50.
Gerald, thank you for your input. I appreciate it. And we look forward to carrying on because I have more to get to, but we have no time left. So all the best to you and to the Trends Journal and its staff. The Trends Journal is published 4 times a year at TrendsResearch.com. TrendsResearch.com. Gerald Celente. Gerald, thank you, my friend, for being on today.
Hey, thank you, Gary.
I'm Gary Null. I want to thank all of you for listening. Hard issues, yes. Important to understand their implications to us, you bet. But do you know anywhere else in the United States in the media, the mainstream media, they're covering any of the things we did today? Have a nice day, everyone.